everyone, and welcome again to Leaders Uncut. And today it's my great pleasure to have with us Mike Kuczkowski, who is the founder and CEO of Orangefiery. Hello, Mike. How are you doing today on this beautiful Friday?
Hi, Catherine. Doing great. We made it.
Great.
We made it to Friday.
You made it to Friday, I know. Well, great. So I'd love for you to start by giving us a little bit of a background on yourself and then tell us everything that you are doing or working on with Orangefiery. That would be a great start.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So, yeah, by way of background, I started my career I actually have a degree in something called newspaper, which, as I note from what gets delivered to the bottom of my driveway every day, is not much of an industry as it was. And I was warned about that in our graduation in 1992. But I spent 6 years in journalism. I spent 2 years in politics. I was the director of communications for the mayor of New Haven, Connecticut. And then I went into PR agency life. And I thought being in PR agency was a good mix of the kind of objective, outsider perspective you would get as a journalist. You have to gather up all of your insights and understand the landscape and what's going on. And then the skills around storytelling as well that were, evident both in the mayor's office and
Yeah.
and in journalism. So worked at a company called Edelman. I was there for about 12 years. I was their global client relationship manager for their Pfizer business for 7 of those years. I started a company called Edelman Consulting, which was a great business. I really enjoyed it, but didn't sync with where the firm saw itself going over the long term. And so I left and started my own company, Orangefiery, in 2014. And we've been around doing a blend of strategic work, strategic planning, and things of that nature, and communications. And we find that the balance between those two things is really critical because, sometimes when you're in a position as a company, the problem that you need to solve is that you need to understand, like, what's the business that we want to be in the future, and how are we going to get there? And that's a strategy question, right? And communications is kind of a secondary thing, but once you have that story, you have to tell it, and you have to get everybody on board and the rest of it. So we think that's a kind of problem-solving activity that we often are engaged with our clients in doing, and that can be, we've done it in corporate philanthropy with some corporate foundations. We've done it for many of our clients are in the biotech and healthcare space, and they're going to enter a new market at some point if a product gets approved. So what does that look like, and how do we prepare for launch, things of that nature. And also, problems that could be in the public affairs space or in the crisis space or things of that nature. And then we do the communications part is really fulfilling that. So how do you take, that good strategy that you've developed to take your business in a new direction and operationalize that? And right now, so many of those problems are problems of brand, problems of marketing, problems of channel. What channels do you want to be in? And sort of activation that we're well suited to kind of support those businesses as well.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. And you are really working on critical elements that are very, very important right now. Everything is changing, and the not only our environment is changing, but the technologies that surround us are changing, which really forces business people, entrepreneurs, leaders to reevaluate how they present themselves and also what tools to integrate within their systems, which also can change the story. So their story inevitably has to be altered to some level, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the change is, the pace of change was fast in 2008 to 2010, and it's only accelerated in a lot of respects. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting from my journey, my personal standpoint, is thinking about things from a systems thinking standpoint. It sort of changes the model of linear thinking. Here's where we're going. It's going to be, unless something happens, we'll continue in the same trajectory. And very rarely is that true, but it's still the basis of a lot of strategic planning exercises. So, for the most part, we like to think about, well, what's happening in the landscape? Who are the stakeholders that are going to affect your business, whether that's competitors, the regulatory framework, other technology changes, and really try to keep an eye on that on a fairly frequent basis. We sort of joke there's no reason to have a 5-year plan anymore. You might want to have a 3-year plan, but the thing you should spend the most time is really on your 12 to 18 month outlook and what you're going to do about what's happening there, because the pace of change is a big factor. And what's happening, we're in a moment with technology where there's a great deal of disruption and a lot yet to be sorted out about where things are going to land. And so you sort of have to look at that from it's almost like a game theory standpoint. How do you place multiple bets, learn while you're doing it, see what's happening, and then lean in on the thing that seems to be most successful. But it's very hard to predict the future. So
it's very hard. And like you said, you have to try different things and bet on different things and then see what's going to stick, right? So what's the process with you? If someone is, of course, realizing, oh my God, yes, I have to look at the way I present myself, I really have to strategize again or reinvent the way we present ourselves. So what's the process? Where do they start?
Well, it's usually, we think this is a team sport, to be honest with you. So right out of the gate, we would like to bring together the leadership team of an organization rather than a singular voice of authority. It feels like one of the things that's true is if you think about things from a system standpoint, you think about things from a multi-stakeholder standpoint, there are lots of different perspectives that are valuable to determine the course of a company, what its positioning is, what business it wants to be in, that sort of thing. And so we think first we should take a look objectively at what does the outside world look like, and part of that would be something our team can do in terms of looking at trends and looking at issues. But a big part of it is what the company already knows internally. Okay, so if you're an organization, you've got smart people who are interacting with the outside world on a regular basis. They're seeing things. Let's make sure we get that input into a process. And then, through one or a series of workshops, really try to get to the point. I mean, this is not a great marketing play for us, but I will say we often joke that we're a problem definition company because I think, we want to bring those perspectives together to make sure that when we think there's a problem, we have it right. We have the right dimensions to it. We have it the right scale. We understand the potential impact. We understand whether it's short term or long term.
Yeah.
And, really bringing multiple voices from within the company to do that work and make sure that we're hearing from, people who are interacting again with that outside world. That's how we get somewhere. That's how we really can make sure that we've got an action plan. I think, as Albert Einstein said, if I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes figuring out what the problem is and 1 minute solving it. And I'm not sure we're quite at that ratio, but I do think spending the time to get the problem right is
that makes sense. Is your marketing making an impact? Are you reaching the right audience? Is your messaging truly connecting? Are you maximizing your return on investment? At Slice Marketing, we use AI-powered insights to fine-tune your targeting, optimize your messaging, design high-converting websites, and craft content that inspires, entertains, and educates, or to amplify your brand's impact. Sometimes a small adjustment can create big results. Let's chat, no strings attached. Email us at catherine.oaks@slicemarketing.com or visit our website. And now you have to be hyper-focused too. All right, sounds great. So there's one thing that you're doing that is really dear to my heart is biotech. Biotech commercialization, strategy services. You have a lot of biotech companies that are inventing new products, and then they have to transform their innovation and start putting it out on the market. So can you tell us about this and what's the process? And I don't know if you have any case studies that you can share, but I am fascinated by that world, and I see a lot of new products coming out, and I think it's going to be exponential with all these new technologies, including AI, that will speed up the innovation in that field of biotechnology.
Yeah, there's a really smart writer at Stat News who coined the phrase, it's biotech century. And I think he's really right. That was Matthew Herper. And in many respects, what's happening right now, it's on multiple fronts. You've got cancer therapies and immuno-oncology that are leveraging the body's own immune system to fight cancer. That's amazing.
Yeah.
You have technologies now in cell therapy that can, address and be curative, frankly, from a single treatment for genetic diseases and rare diseases. Things that we just didn't think were possible even 10, 20 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and we continue to see the frontiers of medicine open up new possibilities, and lots of companies taking important swings at turning those things into therapies that people can take. The thing that's interesting to me is, there is the discovery, pure discovery, and then there's what it takes to bring a drug to market. And the latter part is where we get very excited. We definitely have, I will say one of the things about working with biotech is sometimes you are taking something through it's a clinical trial. People may not understand this. It may fail. And we've had instances where the science did not prove out, even though there was a very, very good reason to think that it would, right? And so when you see that happen, it's a great disappointment. But you've been working with brilliant scientists, great clinical people, great commercial people along the pathway to understand, well, what is this, innovation going to really do? What do patients need? What do clinicians need? What are their current tools, and what is the current state of, their kind of experience with a condition? And then how can you really influence change on that? A lot of that work is I think it's extraordinary, because you really get into what is the life of a patient, a caregiver, what does a clinician's world look like? What is a new innovation and the challenge of adopting that innovation into clinical practice? There was something from the Institute of Medicine years ago that said, it takes on average 20 years for clinical innovation to be adopted into everyday practice. And I think of us as working every day to shorten that window for our clients in the benefit, where patients will benefit from that. But there are so many. It's a very complex system. It's kind of really gets us thinking around some of the things I was mentioning earlier. What are the barriers and what are the opportunities? And so we start working with companies usually when they're pretty far along, like a phase 2 program is completed and it looks very promising, and they're talking with the FDA about a phase 3, or they've gotten their C round of funding. Although we do work with seed round funders, seed round companies, to hone their investor presentation and really try to tell investors, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And then we're trying to support both the corporate story and the commercial pathway. What do we need when it comes to talking to medical societies or patient advocacy groups? What are the educational opportunities? And what are the real information needs of these different stakeholders? Because it's complicated. It's at multiple levels. You're not going to tell a patient the same thing you might tell a clinician or a KOL, key opinion leader for that matter. And so you're working on communications, but it has sort of multiple layers, and you want to make sure that you're able to execute, at those multiple layers to affect the change that you need to create.
It is. I mean, I know, because I've been doing this. It's very hard, especially at the beginning, as you try to really hone in your message. And as you work on your product, the product also very often evolves, right? And you discover maybe new capabilities and new channels and new potential partners. So the message at first anyway has a tendency to evolve consistently until you find that bullseye communication that will be effective. First, of course, to find investors, but then to find networks that will distribute and commercialize your product.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, we're working with a client right now who is resurrecting, if you will, a technology that one of our old clients used in the clinic, and it proved unsuccessful, in quotes. It had, a lot of promise, and it was dosed in something like 500 humans. So it's got a pretty good sense of the safety profile. Yeah. And, 8 years later, it seems like they have a different perspective on what that asset may do in the immune system, which is a very complicated part of our biology that we still don't fully understand, right? So you're absolutely right that you have to do sort of test and refine your messaging on a regular basis, but also sometimes the thing underneath it might change. Your understanding of the biology or your understanding of the science may evolve. And I think that's very exciting, because you get a chance to go back and, think about what your hypotheses were. It's instead of being right or wrong, you're sort of learning and iterating and building on what you've said in the past. And I think that's a pretty exciting issue.
It is. There's something else that you do that I love, and I would imagine you have to use new technologies, is developing awareness campaigns. Now, there are so many immersive tools that can be used to elevate a brand or to share a message in a way that has never been done before. And to me, it's so much more efficient, because people are tired of the old commercials where people shout at you, they don't work anymore. I mean, you just turn off the channels when things like that happen. So how do you approach this, and what new tools are you using to build brand awareness and elevate brand recognition?
Well, when it comes to brand awareness for us, very often it's not so much product brand, it's condition awareness. And we're working with organizations and companies that try to focus on a thing that their new treatment may address. So it can be a condition, like you say, somebody who's got a type of hematological cancer, and our client is going to address that. And most of the time, we're going to be working primarily with the clinicians on that because they're the experts. We want them to know what's differentiated about the product, what the science says. But we want patients to know what their role in that is and what it really means to them, be able to, be an informed party in all of that. And sometimes we've had clients where we've worked on disease awareness around particular subsets of a condition. You may have Parkinson's disease, or you may have some other neurological condition, say, and one aspect of that might be addressed by a new therapy. A lot of times we've experienced people their lives are very complex. They're dealing with multiple therapies, multiple issues. I remember being in an advisory board with a Parkinson's group at one point, and someone pulled out a Ziploc quarter-gallon bag of Ziplocs and said, "This is what I have to carry around by way of my pills," because they're needing to take something short-term, they're needing to take something to counteract certain side effects, they're needing to take things, and they've got both pharmaceuticals and other things in their mix that they're taking. So it's important to understand their lives, but then it's also important to kind of hear from them. What does this thing mean to you? And what would it mean if something could address it, right? Bring that out, because very often, these conversations have the potential to benefit tens of thousands, if not more, people. And, I think giving voice to patients and giving voice to the patient experience is a really important element, that's kind of at the other end of the spectrum from your pure science story about a mechanism of action, or what does a drug do to a target cell, blah, blah, blah. Both are important stories, right? But, to us, I think getting into the patient world, understanding what their experience is like, and being able to hear from them what something new might mean. And frankly, what are some of the watch outs? What are some of the concerns they might have? And be able to bring that to bear, because it's such an important aspect of things. So we do want patients to have good information. It's very funny. I used to work for a big pharmaceutical company, as a consultant. And one of the issues was around direct-to-consumer advertising and defending their right to do that. Which obviously that's a mixed bag as a debate, but I think in general, one of the things that we found interesting was if you had a condition and there was an ad that addressed that condition, it was an effective ad, and it was important for you to hear that information. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't, we called it the non-target effect. It was annoying. It seemed like it was all the same stuff. It's a long list of side effects, or it seems like they're all the same. It's kind of white noise. And I think, if you broaden the lens of what you're trying to do, which is really education, and you think about not just the advertising, but the multi-channel piece that you can do, what you can do with patient advocacy, what you can do with public relations communications, what you can do with social media. If you do it in the right way, obviously you have to be compliant. You can kind of, it's not the same thing. It's a very fragmented media environment anyway, so I'm not sure what the advertising world is doing, probably still buying spots in the 6 o'clock news. And some of that can be great, but we're trying to work upstream from that and figure out what's the component of a brand that people connect with, and how do we tell that across multiple channels.
Yeah, that's important. You have to be also careful not to overdo it, because I think when you overdo something, people disconnect as well. So you have to find the right balance. I think it's critical, but I see a lot of errors being made out there still, right? But anyway, this is what
Catherine, I find in our world, 50% of marketing or communications is supposed to be listening, and it's often underrated.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you see the future of communication? What do you foresee happening in the next 2 years, since we have to think short term?
I don't know. I think 2 years is a tough time horizon, even though I just said I don't want to think too long term.
Yeah.
But I think in the short term, you're going to see the influence of AI, artificial intelligence, is pretty significant, and it's getting better. And I think we're using these tools, for a variety of things. I think it's a really good tool for structuring things, for doing research, and for structuring problem sets, and for kind of evaluating communications execution. And if people are using it that way, I think it'll make things a lot better. I think there's just great transition going on, and I see an opportunity for people to think about their communications more holistically, where the lines between advertising and social media and PR and some of these other channels blurs, and you start to think more strategically across those channels. but that's still rare, and I think it's an important thing. We're doing some work in paid, owned, earned media to try to blend those three together and think about how do you build a brand, first of all, that can, really be optimized for paid, owned, and earned. And then from that, how do you sequence those communications so that, if you have a strong earned-centric brand, you're going out with a campaign that starts with earned, but then you're amplifying it with paid and with owned. In other cases where you might not have the traction, and you don't have the budget, maybe it's a combination of owned and earned with a little bit of paid. Finally, when you have the resources, you can do paid, but then really think about how do we engage audiences through owned and earned activities. And I think that's where you're going to see a number of brands continue to experiment. And I think, frankly, a lot of success with that, because I think there's, I think of the world that we've all sort of chosen sides. It's like the difference between psychology and sociology and political science and some other disciplines. We all decided what we think the most interesting part of the marketing mix is, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to use our set of tools to influence change and to change attitudes, awareness, understanding, and behavior. And I think it's just gonna be more and more interesting to see how are people leveraging these different tools. The worry I have is people will say, a TikTok campaign worked, and they get into the tactic without thinking so much about the strategy, or something like that. And that's, I don't think you're ever going to avoid that completely. When it works at whatever level, people open their eyes and they see the possibilities, and that's very exciting too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, you have to do some A/B testing and try out, but it makes sense to strategize properly at first, understanding the needs of your core audience and making sure that whatever you say really touches a chord and resonates with their expectations. That's very important.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you probably experienced some of this too, and I'm interested in your take on it. But I remember 15 years ago, it was all about digital. And I was always sort of looking at that and say, well, that's interesting. It's a great new channels opened up, but what's really changed? And to this day, I think, maybe you have better metrics around the engagement in digital, but the fundamental tools around insights, research-driven, audience-centric content that drives action, it's just become something that you can now measure and see from end to end, which is awesome, right? Yeah. And we're seeing a similar thing in social media happen around that same time. Now we're seeing the influence of AI, but I don't think, so much of what we've done, it's actually shown how it's more the same than different. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we're seeing an end of interruption-based marketing. You have to earn an audience's attention when they're in all these different channels, and a lot of their time is being spent on screens. And so that's, I think, just going to be a more interesting challenge for those of us in comms and marketing and other related disciplines to try to address.
It will, but I also see a trend in developing and using hyper-personalized messages. And of course, it does not work in all cases. When you have a consumer product, you can't really do that. I mean, as narrow as you'd like. But when you work in B2B fields, that's something that's more doable. Is that something that you implement as well?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, there's always this problem, right? It was a David Ogilvy quote, 50% of your advertising is wasted. I just can't tell you which 50%. Yeah. And so, our desire to get the right message in the right channel to the right person, that's the challenge, right? And I think it's a wonderfully complex one. It's why it's more efficient if you can get people to opt in and give you their attention rather than trying to earn it. Or trying to interrupt it and get it that way. Yeah. But in any event, I think, there's the data piece of this just continues to get more interesting. I think we're going to have to be, really cognizant of what people want from a privacy perspective. Mm-hmm. But the more we can identify what are people looking for, mm-hmm. and, often have them tell us, I think the more opportunity we have to, do a better job of communicating on our end about what that is. Yeah. And you're going to get people who try to take advantage of that in a wrong way, and that'll probably breed regulation. There'll be some other challenges there, but that's also as old as the hills, if you will, in our discipline, and we just have to keep doing the sort of quote unquote right thing as much as we can. Yeah,
you have to play the game in an ethical way. That I think is very important, right? Because the other way may work short time, but not long term. So it depends on your goals. Yeah, that sounds great. So Mike, if someone is interested in speaking with you, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Oh, you can go to our website, orangefiery.com. That's orange like a fruit, and FIERY.com. There's a contact us there. Just send us an email, and love to chat with people and get their perspective on what is out there, what we're doing, and if we can help, we'd love to give it a shot.
Sounds great. Wonderful. So thank you for that. So now I always ask my guests to share a story of resilience, something you had to overcome in your life that has taught you some critical information that has made a huge difference in your life, what would that be, Mike?
Boy, so many.
I'm
When
sure.
I really think about it. I mean, I think that there was a point in time, and I realized, I say this one in particular because I recognize the same pattern in many other people from different walks of life and coming up. When I went from journalism to agency life, it was an interesting transition in part because agencies work in teams and journalism's work as lone wolves, and they're out there doing their own thing. And so I actually found that I struggled a bit in the early going around things like delegation, what I was getting back from people, how to lead teams. I had my ideas about things, but then it became very much about my ideas. And at some point in the middle of in my mid 30s, I realized it was not going to work that way. It couldn't scale. I couldn't really be efficient about things, and people had much more to offer than I was able to get out of them. And so I just sort of, the resilience thing for me, I remember my boss at one point, he said, it's interesting, you keep taking on these huge tasks, and we just sit there on the sidelines saying, is he going to be able to do that? Is he going to be able to pull it off? And he said, you do, but there's such an easier way. And he was very smart, and he was very right. And I sort of learned a lot more about letting things go, really engaging people in the process, and really, trying to work more as a coach than as a player manager, if you will.
Yeah.
I was maybe it was a star complex that came from my striving as a kid. I don't know, but in any event, just really trying to see how can I unlock the ideas and the capabilities of other people. And I think it took a little resilience. Maybe that was my stubbornness to get to that point.
It's it's a change. You have to work with a different perspective. And yeah, that's definitely, I could see that would be a challenge. But it is making a big difference for sure. You can't do it all. At least it's hard to do it all for a long period of time. Eventually you get overwhelmed. That too can happen, but maybe not you.
Absolutely. More importantly, there's just so many great leadership, approaches and possibilities out there. You do a lot better when you can unlock that instead of trying to, tightly manage it all.
Very true. Very good advice. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for having me on, Catherine. This has been fantastic. I love the conversation.
It was great to have you here. Really appreciate it, Mike. What you're doing with Orangefiery is wonderful. I really recommend everyone to check Mike's website, orangefiery.com. It's beautifully designed. There's lots of data and information in there. You can see all the verticals that he's focusing on, all the experience that you can benefit from. So go check out the site and get in contact with Mike, because sometimes you think you have all the tools you need, you know how you should strategize for the future, but very often having a third-party counsel makes a big difference, because we do what we do day in, day out, we have maybe ideas that you may not have yourself. So I highly recommend that you check his website. And again, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time.